In your 20s, stress attacked your schedule. In your 30s, it attacked your sleep. After 45, it starts attacking your identity. You used to think of stress as something you move through to get somewhere. Exams, deadlines, kids, bills. Hard, yes, but temporary. Now it doesn't feel temporary. It feels structural. Your body doesn't bounce back like it used to. Your career is no longer a climb. It's a question mark. Your face in the mirror looks more like your parents than the person you still feel like inside. Every pressure seems to whisper the same thing. You're slipping. A mistake at 25 was feedback. The same mistake at 48 feels like evidence that you're outdated. A bad week used to mean you were overwhelmed. Now it feels like proof that you can't handle as much anymore. And bit by bit, the stress stops being about what is happening and becomes about what you believe about yourself. It's not just, I'm tired. It's, maybe I'm no longer capable, no longer attractive, no longer relevant. That's why stress and self-esteem after 45 don't just hurt more. They change the story you tell yourself about who you are. Here's the paradox. By 45, you're supposed to be more confident than ever. You've survived crises, built skills, handled responsibilities that would have crushed your younger self. On paper, this should be your most solid decade. And yet, this is exactly when your self-esteem starts to feel most fragile under stress. The same traits that once made you resilient, pushing through, taking on more, proving yourself, now seem to backfire. Stress doesn't just hit your schedule, it hits your sense of worth. A bad month at work doesn't feel like a rough patch. It feels like evidence that you've peaked and are now on the decline. A forgotten name, a slower reaction, a moment of brain fog suddenly becomes a story about cognitive decline, not simple exhaustion. You find yourself reacting to ordinary pressures with an intensity that surprises even you, and then judging yourself for being weak, which only sinks your confidence further. In your 20s, stress measured how hard you could push. In your 40s and 50s, it feels like it's measuring how much you have left. That's the quiet shift nobody warns you about. When you were younger, being overwhelmed was almost a badge of honor, proof you were hustling, ambitious, building something. You could tell yourself, this is temporary, I'm paying my dues. After 45, the story changes. You're not paying dues anymore, you're supposed to be collecting returns. So when stress spikes now, it doesn't feel like investment. It feels like miscalculation. Like you built your life on the wrong foundations, or at least on ones your current self can no longer carry. The same workload you once ate for breakfast now leaves you drained for days. And instead of adjusting the load, you attack your identity. I'm getting lazy. I'm losing it. I can't hack it like I used to. There's another twist. The more competent you've been historically, the harder this phase hits. If you were always the reliable one, the high performer, the person who coped, your entire self-esteem is built on being able to absorb pressure and deliver anyway. Stress was the element you proved yourself in. So when that starts to break you instead of polish you, it doesn't just feel like I'm stressed. It feels like I'm no longer who I thought I was. You're not just failing tasks. You're failing your identity. That's why people who objectively are doing fine, steady job, stable family, no catastrophe, can still feel like they're collapsing inside. The outside life hasn't fallen apart. The internal reference point has. You used to feel capable. Now you feel like an actor struggling to remember lines in a play you wrote. At the same time, the sources of stress change their meaning. A younger you getting passed over for a promotion could say, next time, and channel that into more effort. A midlife you getting sidelined for someone younger hears a different message. You're being replaced. Health scares, which in your 30s were wake-up calls to exercise more, land now as reminders that the body does not negotiate forever. The same diagnosis, the same numbers, carry a different psychological weight when you're closer to 50 than 30. Even positive stressors, new roles, new responsibilities, can feel like threats because each new demand competes with limited energy, not infinite potential. This is why midlife can feel like death by 1,000 small cuts rather than one big tragedy. It's not one event. It's the cumulative sense that stress is slowly outpacing who you are. Layered over all this is the brutal comparison with your imagined life. At 25, you had a mental picture of your 45 or 50-year-old self, where you'd be financially, physically, relationally, professionally. Midlife is where the gap between that imagined self and the real one becomes impossible to ignore. Every stressor shines a spotlight on that gap. Financial pressure isn't just about numbers. It's, I should have been further along by now. Relationship conflict isn't just about this argument. It's, by this age, I should know how to love better than this. Career stagnation isn't just about a boring job. It's, so this is it? This is what I did with my potential. Under that narrative, stress becomes constant evidence of personal failure, not a normal response to a demanding phase of life. You're not just tired, you're disappointed in the person you became. The paradox deepens when you realize that externally, this is exactly when people may assume you're at your strongest. You've accumulated status symbols, title, house, family, achievements, that signal stability. Younger colleagues might envy your position. Your children might see you as the unshakable adult. Friends might assume you've figured things out. This external solidity creates a trap. You feel you're not allowed to be as shaken as you actually are. Admitting that stress is messing with your self-esteem feels shameful. If I can't handle this by now, something is really wrong with me. So you armor up. You minimize your struggles around others, even as you privately spiral. You double down on performance while quietly withdrawing emotionally, which only isolates you more. There is also a biological and neurological dimension that you can't hustle your way out of. Sleep becomes more fragile. Hormonal shifts in both men and women affect mood, energy, and cognitive sharpness. Recovery from stress takes longer. The strategies that worked at 30, staying up late to fix things, powering through on caffeine, I'll rest when this is over, now backfire, leaving you more depleted and foggy, which you then interpret as more evidence that you're losing it. The mind takes these normal age-related changes and folds them into a harsh story about decline. Instead of adjusting your expectations and methods, you keep trying to operate like your younger self, and then hate yourself when it doesn't work. The problem isn't just the stress, it's that you're grading yourself with an outdated rubric. Finally, there's a moral layer that makes midlife stress feel heavier. By now, you know your stress doesn't just hit you, it spills onto everyone around you. When you snap at your partner, withdraw from your kids, underperform at work, ignore your health, you're aware that there are consequences. You can see the tired look in your partner's eyes, the caution in your children's voices, the doubt in your team's trust. That awareness adds guilt on top of exhaustion. You're not just stressed. You feel like a worse parent, partner, colleague, leader, and guilt is corrosive to self-esteem. So you end up in a vicious loop. Stress reduces your capacity. Reduced capacity leads to mistakes and irritability. Those lead to guilt and self-attack, which lower your self-esteem further, making the next wave of stress feel even more overwhelming. This is why, after 45, stress and self-esteem don't just coexist, they amplify each other. The stronger the stress, the harsher the story you tell about yourself. And the harsher the story, the weaker you feel in the face of the next stressor. The turning point after 45 is realizing that you can't keep using your younger self as the measuring stick for your worth. As long as every stress response is graded against the version of you who could sleep 4 hours, live on caffeine, and work through anything, you will fail every test. The shift begins when you stop asking, "Why can't I handle what I used to?" and start asking, given the life I have now, the body I have now, the responsibilities I have now, what would a wise response to stress look like? That single change of question moves the whole conversation from humiliation to strategy. You're no longer a broken 30-year-old. You're a 48-year-old, or 55, or 60, facing a different game with different rules. And different rules require different skills, not more self-contempt. The first internal move is to separate stress from character. You've spent decades fusing them. Tired meant weak. Overwhelmed meant incompetent. Snapping at someone meant you're a bad person. Somewhere along the way, you turned every physiological signal into a moral verdict. But stress is not a verdict. It's a message. Your nervous system is telling you that the current load plus the current way you're interpreting life is too much for the current version of you. That's not a failure. That's data. You can keep treating that data as an accusation. I'm clearly not enough. Or you can finally treat it as feedback. Something in the way I'm living, thinking, or expecting needs to be renegotiated. Midlife maturity isn't pretending stress doesn't touch you. It's refusing to let stress define you. To do that, you have to update the story you tell about capacity. When you were younger, capacity meant, how much can I pile onto my shoulders without collapsing? Now, capacity needs a different definition. How precisely can I shape my life to match the energy, values, and time I actually have? That might mean accepting that you won't be the person who works 60 hours, trains for a marathon, raises kids, and builds a side business all at once. Not because you're less valuable, but because you're finally refusing to live in contempt of your own limits. Limits do not mean you are small. They mean you are real. Pretending you have none is what destroyed your self-esteem in the first place. Because every time your body or mind said enough, you answered with, "You're disappointing." The second move is to stop treating your life story as a prosecution and start treating it as a draft. Around midlife, people get obsessed with verdicts. I wasted my potential. I picked the wrong career. I stayed with the wrong person. I was a bad parent. I should be further along. Each stressor then becomes another piece of evidence in that case against yourself. You're not coping with stress. You're building a file on your own failure. The shift is to see that your story is not finished. Everything up to now is context, not conclusion. You can keep cross-examining your past, searching every chapter for proof that you were never enough. Or you can look at the same chapters and ask, given all this, what do I want the next part to look like? That question doesn't erase regret or pain. It just refuses to hand them the pen. There's a brutal but liberating realization here. You will not become the person your 25-year-old self fantasized about. That version of you didn't know the actual costs, the detours, the real you. They were making projections from ignorance and idealism. Holding yourself to that fantasy now is like punishing a tree because it didn't grow into the shape someone once sketched on paper. The point of midlife is not to finally match the fantasy. The point is to respond honestly to what exists, your actual temperament, body, relationships, talents, wounds, and resources. When you stop asking, why didn't I become that? And start asking, what can I build with what is truly here? Stress stops being a constant reminder of failure and becomes a pressure that can be directed, like water, towards reshaping your days. The third move is to stop outsourcing your self-esteem to roles that are, by definition, temporary. For most of your adult life, your value has been tethered to identities that can and will change. The high performer, the attractive one, the provider, the problem solver, the parent whose kids still need them. These roles were useful scaffolding while your inner core was still forming. But after 45, life starts calmly, ruthlessly, taking them away or changing their terms. Careers plateau or end. Children detach. Bodies alter shape and function. Social relevance shifts to younger generations. If your worth is welded to those outer forms, any stress that touches them feels like an attack on your right to exist. The shift is to build esteem on something more primitive and less negotiable. Your capacity to respond with honesty, courage, and responsibility to whatever reality you are in. That sounds lofty, but it's concrete. When a project fails now, you don't get to guarantee success, but you do get to decide, I will face the numbers instead of hiding. I will have the hard conversation instead of disappearing. I will learn something instead of only resenting. When your body changes, you may not be able to restore it to its younger state, but you can decide, I will treat it as an ally, not an enemy. I will move, sleep, and eat in ways that respect what it is now. When a relationship is strained, you can't force harmony, but you can choose, I will speak without cruelty, listen without collapsing, and set boundaries instead of silently rotting. Every time you act from this inner ethic, you send yourself a subtle message. I may not control outcomes, but I can trust who I am in the middle of them. That's midlife self-esteem. Not I always win, but I don't abandon myself when I'm losing. A fourth move is to reframe what being strong actually looks like. Up to now, strength meant tolerating more than other people, saying yes when you wanted to say no, staying longer in situations that drained you because quitting felt like failure. That kind of strength impresses people, but slowly hollows you out. After 45, the body and psyche revolt against that performance. Burnout, depression, anxiety, health breakdowns. They're not proof that you are weak. They're proof that the old definition of strength was unsustainable. The new definition has to include the ability to reduce load, to disappoint others, to walk away from identities that once made you proud but now make you sick. It's the strength to say, I cannot live like this and still respect myself, and to act accordingly. This inevitably forces you to renegotiate with fear. A massive portion of midlife stress is not about what is happening, but about what you fear it means. You don't just lose a job. You fear it means you are unemployable. You don't just gain weight, you fear it means you are now unlovable or invisible. You don't just forget details. You fear it means you're on a fast track to cognitive collapse. Those conclusions are not neutral observations. They are automatic stories. The shift is not to chant fake positives over them, but to catch them in the act and interrogate them. What else could this mean? Which part is fact and which part is narrative? Maybe losing a job means the old structure that carried you is gone, and you now have to build something more aligned with your current self. Terrifying, yes, but different from "I'm finished." Maybe the weight gain is evidence that your coping strategy has been self-numbing, and you now need better ways to regulate emotion. Again, uncomfortable, but different from "I'm disgusting." Fifth, there's the move from isolation to chosen mirrors. In your 30s, you could sometimes white-knuckle your way through stress alone. Friends were optional. Mentors were nice but not essential. Therapy was for when things were really bad. After 45, going alone becomes expensive. Your mind becomes an echo chamber where every stressor is amplified by your harshest narrator. You need other, saner mirrors, people and structures that reflect back something more accurate than your panic. That might mean therapy, coaching, close friendships, or communities where midlife struggle is normal rather than shameful. The point isn't to be rescued. It's to stop letting your most stressed, sleep-deprived self be the sole judge of your worth. When someone grounded looks at your life and says, "This is a hard season, not a personal apocalypse," your nervous system hears a different story. Another essential shift is revaluing small, boring disciplines over dramatic reinventions. Midlife panic often whispers that the only way to fix this feeling is to blow up your life. Quit, move, divorce, reinvent everything overnight. Sometimes radical change is necessary. Often, it's an attempt to escape the slow work of tending to what's already here. Your nervous system, your relationships, your body, they respond far more to consistent small actions than to one big gesture. Going to bed 1 hour earlier, saying no to one extra demand a week, walking 20 minutes a day, protecting one small block of time for something that matters to you. These look insignificant compared to the size of your anxiety. But over months, they rebuild capacity. And as capacity returns, your self-esteem stops being purely theoretical. You don't need to believe new affirmations. You can feel in your bones, "I am a person who shows up for myself." There's also the question of meaning. In younger years, meaning often came bundled with roles. Student, parent of small children, someone on the way up. You didn't have to think about it much. It was built into your trajectory. In midlife, that automatic meaning starts to thin out. Children grow, careers level. The future is no longer an infinite horizon where you can project fantasy. If you don't consciously build a sense of meaning now, stress has nothing to rest on except fear and ego. The shift is to anchor your life in things that remain valuable even when your performance fluctuates. Contributing to something bigger than yourself. Cultivating wisdom rather than just accumulation. Being a decent presence in other people's lives. Creating beauty or order in small ways. When you know what you're living for beyond success, stress stops being only an enemy. It becomes information about where your current life resists your deeper values. Finally, the deepest shift. Directing your judgment away from "how impressive am I?" and toward "how honest am I being?" Midlife exposes all the places where you lied to yourself to keep going. This job is fine. This relationship is okay. This pace is sustainable. This version of me is who I want to be. Stress rips those thin covers. You can try to tape them back down with more denial, more work, more distractions. Or you can have the courage to admit what's true, that some of what you built was built on fear, on pleasing others, on chasing images of success that were never really yours. That admission will temporarily lower your ego's self-esteem, but it will raise something more important: your self-respect. Self-respect says, even if I'm behind, even if I'm scared, even if I've wasted time, I will stop lying to myself now. From that place, the way you handle stress becomes evidence of who you're becoming, not just punishment for who you were. When you stop using your 30-year-old self as the standard and start responding to stress as who you are now, the first shift is inner dignity. Tiredness stops being proof that you're failing and becomes a signal to adjust. Less self-attack, more concrete decisions about what has to leave your life. As you anchor self-esteem in honesty, boundaries, and responsibility instead of perfect performance, each crisis stops being humiliation and starts becoming evidence of character under construction. You also gain room to redesign work, relationships, and daily routine around what actually matters, increasing your sense of control and purpose even with less raw horsepower than before. And as you build small, consistent habits of care and presence, respect for yourself returns in practice, not for who you used to be, but for who you keep choosing to be, especially under pressure. After 45, the temptation is to treat every spike of stress as proof that you're late, behind, or broken beyond repair. You can keep trying to outrun that feeling by working harder, pretending you're fine, or chasing some dramatic reinvention that magically erases your history. Or you can do something more subversive. Let this discomfort be feedback instead of a sentence. If you stop grading yourself against a fantasy younger self and start asking what a truthful, decent, responsible life looks like from here, stress loses some of its poison. It doesn't vanish. It becomes information about what no longer fits. And from there, your self-esteem is no longer built on being untouchable, but on refusing to abandon yourself when you are touched. You don't get to rewrite the first half of your story, but you do get to decide that the second half will not be lived in contempt of your limits or in worship of your regrets.